eagerly looked for the first appearance of Ahmed Fedil. By great good fortune a convoy of ammunition from Mugatta reached Gedaref on the afternoon of the 27th. At dawn the next day Ruthven reported that the advance guard of Ahmed Fedil was approaching the town. The attack began at 8:30. The Dervishes, who fought with their customary gallantry, simultaneously assaulted the north, south, and west faces of the defences. Creeping forward through the high Doura, they were able to get within 300 yards of the enclosures. But the intervening space had been carefully cleared of cover, and was swept by the musketry of the defenders. All attempts to cross this ground, even the most determined rushes, proved vain. While some made hopeless charges towards the walls, others crowded into a few straw shelters and mud huts which the troops had not found opportunity to remove, and thence maintained a ragged fire. After an hour's heavy fusillade, the attack weakened, and presently ceased altogether. At 10 o'clock, however, strong reinforcements having come up, the Dervishes made a second attempt. They were again repulsed, and at 11:15, after losing more than 500 men in killed and wounded, Ahmed Fedil admitted his defeat and retired to a clump of palm trees 2 miles to the west of the town. The casualties among the defenders were 5 men killed, 1 British officer, Captain Dwyer, and 13 men wounded. The Dervishes remained for 2 days in the palm grove, and their leader repeatedly endeavoured to induce them to renew the attack. But although they closely surrounded the enclosures and maintained a dropping fire, they refused to knock their heads against brick walls a third time, and on the 1st of October Ahmed Fedil was forced to retire to a more convenient camp 8 miles to the southward. Here for the next 3 weeks he remained, savage and sulky, and the Kassala column were content to keep to their defences. A few convoys from Mugatta made their way into the forts under the cover of darkness, but for all practical purposes the blockade of the garrison was complete. Their losses in action had reduced their strength. They were not abundantly supplied with ammunition. The smell of the putrefying corpses which lay around the walls and in the doura crop, together with the unhealthy climate and the filth of the town, was a fertile source of disease. A painful and racking fever afflicted all ranks, and at one time as many as 270 of the 400 regular soldiers were prostrated. The recurring night alarms added to the fatigues of the troops and the anxieties of the 7 officers. The situation was indeed so unsatisfactory that Colonel Parsons was compelled to ask for assistance. Major General Rundle, who in the Sirdar's absence held the chief command, immediately organised a relief expedition. The 9th, 12th, and half of the 13th Sudanese, with 3 companies of the Camel Corps, under Colonel Collinson, were at once sent from Omdurman to the mouth of the Rahad River. The infantry were conveyed in steamers. The Camel Corps marched along the bank, completing the whole distance of 130 miles in 56 hours. The Blue Nile garrisons, with the exception of the post at Rosaires, were also concentrated. By the 8th of October, the whole force was collected at Abu Haraz. 500 camels, which had marched from Omdurman, and every available local beast of burden joined the transport of the column. On the 9th, the 12th Soudanese started up the Rahad River for Ain el Owega. From this point the road leaves the river and strikes across the desert to Gedaref, a distance of 100 miles, and in the whole distance water is only found at the wells of El Kau. Owing to the scarcity of water, it was necessary to carry a supply with the troops. The transport being insufficient to provide for the whole force, the march had to be made in 2 columns. The Camel Corps and the 12th Soudanese, about 1,200 strong, set forth under Colonel Collinson from Ain el Owega on the 17th, and reached Gedaref safely on the 22nd. Warned of their arrival, Ahmed Fedil, having made a feeble night attack, which was repulsed by the garrison with a loss to themselves of 2 Soudanese wounded, realised that he had now no chance of recapturing the town. Preparations were indeed made to attack him, but on the 23rd of October When a reconnaissance was made in the direction of his camp, the Dervish force was seen moving off in a southerly direction, their retreat covered by a strong rearguard, which was intended to perform the double duty of protecting the retirement and preventing desertion. The operations conducted by Colonel Parsons thus ended in complete success. Great difficulties were overcome, great perils were encountered, great results were obtained. But while we applaud the skill of the commander and the devotion of his subordinates, it is impossible not to criticize the rash and over-confident policy which sent such a weak and ill-equipped force on so hazardous an enterprise. The action of Gedaref, as has been shown, was, through no fault of the officers or men of the expedition, within an ace of being a disaster. But there were other critical occasions when only the extraordinary good fortune which attended the force saved it from destruction. First, the column was not discovered until it reached Mugatta. Secondly, it was not attacked in the thick bush. Thirdly, the Dervishes gave battle in the open instead of remaining within their walls, whence the troops could not have driven them without artillery. And fourthly, the reserve ammunition arrived before the attack of Ahmed Fedil. After his defeat before Gedaref, Ahmed Fedil reverted to his intention of joining the Khalifa in Kordofan, and he withdrew southwards towards the Dinder river with a following that still numbered more than 5,000. To pass the Nile in the face of the gunboats appeared impossible. He did not, however, believe that steamers could navigate the higher reaches of the rivers, and in the hopes of finding a safe crossing place, he directed his march so as to strike the Blue Nile south of Karkoj. Moving leisurely, and with frequent delays to pillage the inhabitants, he arrived on the Dinder, 25 miles to the east of Karkoj, on the 7th of November. Here he halted to reconnoitre. He had trusted in the Karkoj Rosaires reach being too shallow for the gunboats, but he found two powerful vessels already patrolling it. Again frustrated, he turned southwards, meaning to cross above the Rosaires cataract, which was without doubt impassable to steamers. On the 22nd of October, Colonel Lewis, with 2 companies of the Camel Corps and 3 squadrons of cavalry, started from Omdurman with the object of marching through the centre of the Gezira and of re-establishing the Egyptian authority. His progress was in every way successful. The inhabitants were submissive, and resigned themselves with scarcely a regret to orderly government. Very little lawlessness had followed the defeat of the Khalifa, and whatever plundering there had been was chiefly the work of the disbanded irregulars who had fought at Omdurman under Major Wortley's command on the east bank of the Nile. In every village sheikhs were appointed in the name of the Khedive, and the officers of the cavalry column concerned themselves with many difficult disputes about land, crops, and women, all of which they settled to their satisfaction. Marching through Amwamra, Halusan, and Mesalamia, Colonel Lewis reached Karkoj on the 7th of November, almost at the same time that Ahmed Fedil arrived on the Dinder. For the next 6 weeks, the movements of the two forces resembled a game of hide and seek. Ahmed Fedil, concealed in the dense forest and jungle of the east bank, raided the surrounding villages and worked his way gradually towards the Rosaires cataract. Colonel Lewis, perplexed by false and vague information, remained halted at Karkoj, dispatched vain reconnaissances in the hopes of obtaining reliable news, revolved deep schemes to cut off the raiding parties, or patrolled the river in the gunboats. And meanwhile sickness fell upon his force. The malarial fever, which is everywhere prevalent on the Blue Nile in the autumn, was now at its height. More than 30% of every garrison and every post were affected. The company holding Rosaires were stricken to a man, and only the 2 British officers remained fit for duty. The cavalry force which had marched through the Gezira suffered the most severely. One after another every British officer was stricken down and lay burning but helpless beneath the palm-leaf shelters or tottered on to the friendly steamers that bore the worst cases north. Of the 460 men who composed the force, 10 had died, and 420 were reported unfit for duty, within a month of their